tenacity and resilience in speaking up is extraordinary. We are deeply sorry for the pain and suffering that has been caused. I also want to thank the Sunday Mirror and Geraldine McKelvie for shining a light on child sexual exploitation in Telford and supporting the victims and survivors tell their personal and harrowing stories. Additionally, we acknowledge the hard work of the inquiry chair, Tom Crother QC, and his team who worked on the inquiry. The report commissioned by the Council dates back to 1989, and it heard evidence dating back to the 1970s. In 1989, I was 3 years of age. As I've said on numerous occasions, I am so proud to come from Telford. For me, it was a wonderful place to grow up. However, it clearly wasn't the same for many children and young people of my generation and generations before and generations after. And this brings us great sadness. As a Telford dad now and a corporate parent, with responsibility for those children and young people who are in our care, I'm more determined than ever to make this a safe and happy place for future generations. The report has found areas where more could have been done over the last 3 decades to support victims and survivors and their families. Even though the inquiry acknowledges we have made significant and transformational improvements since 2016, and the inquiry specifically states that services today are good, we fully accept and will act on all of the inquiries of the recommendations in full. It is for all of us, every elected member, every council officer, every partner, to ensure that these recommendations are fully implemented. I will be shortly speaking to the Conservative leader, Councillor Andrew Eade, and the Liberal Democrat leader, Bill Tomlinson, and the Police and Crime Commissioner, John Campion, about how we can work together to take these recommendations forward. One early concern that I have read about from victims and survivors is the funding of the Kate team. The team of dedicated professionals who are at the forefront of our response to tackling child sexual exploitation, who are commended throughout by the inquiry. The report proposes we make sure that team is properly funded for the next 5 years. I make a personal commitment that for as long as we are running the council, that funding will be protected, not just for the next 5 years, but beyond. I am truly humbled and thankful in equal measure that survivors Holly Archer and Scarlett Jones have agreed to be part of our implementing process moving forward. Working together, we will co-design our response to the inquiry's recommendations to make sure we are doing the very best we can for those people who need us the most. The way we work together will be released soon. I would like to publicly thank Scarlett and Holly for holding us to account and for agreeing to be part of our journey moving forward. Together, all of us can ensure that we build a future that we can be proud about, a future that ensures that our children, our grandchildren, now and generations to come, are safe and happy in Telford and share the experiences that I did as a child growing up here in Telford and Wrekin. Thank you. We now move to item 5, which is the annual public health report, and I'd like to invite our Director of Public Health, Liz Noakes, to address us.
Thank you. I'm pleased to produce my 7th annual public health report for Telford Wrekin, not having produced one these last 2 pandemic years. These last 2 years have shone a light on the existing inequalities within the country and within our communities. Inequalities are widening before the pandemic, and the pandemic and the cost of living crisis is worsening the situation. The report gives some early intelligence about what we have known about inequalities within the borough. Inequalities are unfair, unjust and unavoidable. The report highlights what the council, range of partners and others are doing to tackle inequalities within our borough. But more needs to be done, and we need to refresh the action plan going forward, using our themes of best start in life, economic opportunity, community in place, public health and prevention, healthcare and integration, and COVID. I make 7 broad recommendations for Cabinet. These have been endorsed by the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I would like to thank all those that have contributed to the report, a wide range of council teams and partners, but particularly Helen, Damien and Nicola, who have pulled this report together. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Kevin?
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for all the work that you've done on this. I welcome Liz's statutory annual public health report that is focused on tackling inequalities within our borough. As Liz quite rightly says, tackling health inequalities is everyone's business. Inequalities in health are unfair and unjust and largely consequence of poverty and the wider determinants of health. I know the pandemic and the cost of living crisis have impacted on widening these inequalities. As a cooperative council, I know a wide range of teams and partners are engaged in doing all they can to narrow these inequalities, and this report brings to life many examples of how the council is working with partners to make a difference. But we know there's clearly more to be done, and we need to make sure we embed our approach that is both intelligence-led and community-focused. Our partners, particularly in the NHS, also need to take this approach and make sure barriers to access to healthcare that are compounded by health inequalities are recognised more widely. Betty has certainly demonstrated what is possible when we work together. Nationally, more needs to be done to reduce inequalities within the country, as many of those wider determinants of health are influenced by central government policy. Health inequalities are caused by an unequal distribution of wider determinants of health, including housing, employment, education and wealth. From a government-led programme of austerity beginning in 2010, this has undoubtedly worsened inequalities and only been highlighted by the COVID pandemic. I would ask Cabinet to endorse our Director of Public Health's 7 recommendations.
Thank you, Kelly. Andy?
Yeah, I certainly welcome this report. It's actually more than a report, isn't it? It really is an agenda for action. What it represents for me anyway is a challenge to the new integrated care system here in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, because at the centre of what's intended for the ICSs is that they should work at place, they should work in partnership, and they should work more than anything on the preventative agenda. And this report sets out for us in Telford and Wrekin what that preventative agenda is. It also sets out, as Councillor Middleton has said, how the link with our health inequalities plan. And it sets out too how we aspire to become a marmot borough, and I think that's something we ought to have on in our sights moving forward. I think what some of the stories in this report show is that we can make a difference locally. There is more we can do locally, but we also have to bear in mind that many of the real answers lie with a national response. But we haven't reached the summit, I don't think, of what we are capable of achieving by better working together locally and by more investment in the preventative agenda. And I think this report really does give us a way forward on all of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Paul Watson?
Yeah, just to echo what Andy said about the integrated care system, it's really, really important that local-based approach for the future is taken on board, and locality is seen as important. We're already working very hard on that, and I know you and the teams are working hard on that. And we've got, as a cooperative council, we've got a really good base of working alongside our communities to co-design services, and that's what we need to do to face some of these inequalities. It's not doing unto people, it's working alongside people to meet those needs and those inequalities. I welcome the report.
Thank you. Group leaders?
Yeah, I'm curious with recommendation 2.3. It's just probably clarification on the wording, really. And it's about the independent care system. It says, I quote, NHS partners should work with the council and partners. Now, does that mean they're not? They should, they are. So there's a bit of clarification on that.
Sure.
And I wonder if we could have a quick resume from Liz on the maternity situation now, certainly with regard to the PRH, just to see how that's progressing along.
In terms of Ockerton?
Sorry?
In terms of the Ockerton review?
Yeah.
Yeah, I echo the word prevention is better than cure, really. I mean, it's sad, really, in some of the services that we've had that help people. I was thinking of the Sure Start programme and all those things that we've set up have had to be curtailed or cut back. You know, we had services there out for the youth that we couldn't afford, and we've had to cut back on those. And I'm just mindful of the fact that we're going through we're going through a process, or he's going through a process of changing our Prime Minister, and they're all trying to vie with each other to see who's going to cut taxes the most. And I just hope they're mindful that when you're in government and your responsibility, you have a responsibility particularly to the most vulnerable. The opening announcements you've made bring that home more than anything. And as awful as it sounds, to help protect people, and even, you know, through CSE, you need money. You need money for the resources that are required. And where is somebody shouting out there, well, how are we going to look after the most vulnerable in our society? You looked at COVID, and who are the worst affected? Again, the most vulnerable. Who had to borrow money rather than have savings because they couldn't go on holiday? The people who couldn't afford to go on holiday in the first place are even worse off now than they were before. That's going to have a huge effect on their mental health, never mind physical health. Massive growth in food banks. As laudable as they are, and we support them at our local church, you think this is great, but really, should we be having food banks in this day and age? Can't someone sit down and work out what is the minimum income that people require to live an independent life so they can provide for themselves? I think there's a lot on this agenda, and I would echo what Liz says. We can't all solve this as a local authority. We can do the best we can with what we have, and I really do welcome the report, but we do need a big helping hand from central government to focus on this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I just want for comments and questions before I bring Liz back in. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing nationally is the regression of life expectancy for the first time in a generation, and that's must be a concern for everybody. There's always been a social compact in this country that the next generation does better than the previous one, and linked to that, Liz, in terms of the it's only come out today, the Centre for Cities report. Although we're not a city, we often are involved and included in the work of the Centre for Cities, talking about the cost of living impacts upon public health. Just be really helpful if you could just pick up the points around the impact of cost of living, particularly around eating and heating, given where the bills are going and the inflationary impact of that, please.
A number of points made. So first of all, on terms of recommendation 2.3, I think it should probably read NHS partners should continue to work, but what I think I'm trying to say is that we need a stronger focus on children and young people within the ICS planning framework, and that's why I've highlighted it in a separate recommendation. In terms of maternity in Ockerton, the Health and Wellbeing Board had a verbal report last time from SAF around that. I haven't prepared to give a report to you on that today, but would be happy to do that, or ask one of the representatives from SAF to do that for you. Moving on in terms of maternity, in a sense the report highlights some of the work in terms of healthy pregnancy particularly, which is an initiative that Helen is leading within the local maternity system. Bill, you made a point about Sure Start, and clearly this plan has a real focus on best start in life, which is poverty and your start in life is what drives inequalities. I'm pleased to say that we have set up and are meeting for the first time a Best Start in Life programme board working for Telford and Wrekin as part of the ICS system. It starts next week, and indeed the council is one of 70 local authorities that will benefit from Start for Life funding, which is the new programme of funding over the next 3 years. So we wait and see the details of that, but we will make the most of those opportunities to give our children, young people, the best start in life, because that is so important for their long-term health and inequalities going forward. And Sean, you asked around cost of living, and certainly heating and eating is absolutely fundamental. I am really concerned about this winter going forward in terms of short-term impacts on people's health indeed during that winter period, and in terms of the long-term impact of not eating well is certainly a contributing factor to inequalities over the longer term too. So yes, particularly worried around the heating and the fuel energy crisis that we have, in terms of its short-term impacts as well as the long-term impact. I think people start to think we're always talking about long-term in public health, but I think there's going to be some real short-term impacts there.
Liz, thank you very much. Kelly, is there anything you want to come back on?
No, that's fantastic.
Thank you for your work. It's been proposed and seconded. Everyone in agreement? That's everybody. Thank you very much. And thanks Liz and your team for the work. I'll bring the report forward. Item 6 then is the Equality and Diversity Strategy. Kelly Middleton.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank the team for all of their hard work on this strategy, and all of the local community groups and organisations that have contributed to the development of this strategy. I'm really happy that this can be published and put into action. It takes into account all of the council's legal duties and responsibilities, and the type of culture that our council wants to promote through its workforce and the way it wants to treat customers and partners, to show that equality and diversity is really valued within our borough and threads through everything we do in every department. The challenges we have faced in recent years highlight the importance of communities working together. So back in December we took a report to Cabinet setting out the Council's proposed approach to a 4-year Equality and Diversity Inclusion Strategy. The strategy included a clear commitment, vision and a new set of objectives, all of which were driven by a supporting action plan that the Council would report against on an annual basis. The Council wanted to ensure there was an opportunity for local community groups, partners and employees to get involved and have their say before finalising the strategy. Cabinet agreed this approach, and earlier this year we commissioned DWC Consulting to act as independent facilitators and carry out a series of engagement activities with a range of community and internal stakeholders. The purpose of this report is to update you on the outcomes of the engagement and how it's been used to inform the final strategy. Engagement with key partners took place in 2 parts. The first was in January as part of the budget engagement process. We held 2 events for members of the voluntary and community sector, parish and town council and businesses. So use this as an opportunity to talk to them about the draft strategy as well. Engagement was then carried out with local community groups between 14th of February and the 3rd of March, and sessions were held at different locations across the borough. We contacted a wide range of community organisations based on their ability to provide insights into lived experience of communities bearing the protected characteristics. We gave them the opportunity to get involved, and those that came back to us participated are listed in the full report. In addition, we included 2 public drop-in sessions that were hosted at Park Lane Centre in Woodside and Telford Wrekin Interfaith Council in Wellington, to give the wider community the opportunity to get involved. We also made the strategy available on our website for anyone who wished to access and submit their views in order to make the engagement as accessible as possible for all. Mainly the engagement had the external theme, gaining participants' views on what is most important to them as customers and importantly what their needs are. It did not go into any detail around managing the council's workforce or its governance arrangements, through some general comments were noted on part of this. Following completion of this, we were issued a report outlining the key themes, issues identified, conclusions that emerged and recommendations. We've carefully considered all the feedback, talking to a number of different council services to follow up specific comments that have either led to new actions in the action plan or require a public response. As a result, the updated strategy recommendations and feedback are provided in appendices A, B and C for your consideration. In particular, the key changes we've made to the strategy in response to the feedback include updating the demographic data to provide a bigger picture overall. Case studies have been added in different parts of the strategy to demonstrate good news stories of what is happening locally, and a business case for diversity and a new paragraph around the Armed Forces Act. And more local images have been included where relevant. In terms of next steps, we're following the recommendations for Cabinet, which are to approve the strategy as a final version, to note results for the community engagement exercise in Appendix C and improve publication of it alongside the strategy once it's been finalised, and Cabinet grant delegated authority to the Director, Communities, Customer and Commercial Services in consultation with Cabinet Member for Leisure, Public Health, Wellbeing, Equalities and Partnerships to take the necessary steps to implement the Equality and Diversity Inclusion Action Plan moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Is that seconded? Thank you very much. Any comments or questions for members of the Cabinet? Andy?
I suppose one thing to point out with this really encouraging report is the links with the last item on the agenda. I mean, if you're addressing inequalities, you ought also to be working on this diversity and equality agenda. Many of the initiatives that we're taking in this council are addressing both at the same time, and that's really important. And it's this relentless focus, I think, that we need to have on anywhere that we find any element, not just of discrimination, which of course we need to fight at every turn, but also where people inadvertently are missing out, and that means neighbourhoods, and it means individuals who we might want to categorise in particular ways, and that I think is what I like about what we're doing on this council. When we're continuing constantly to focus on that agenda, and I mean, one of the acid tests for me is always whether the workforce feel happy working in this environment. And if you look at page 10 of this report, you'll see that they do. You'll never get to 100% satisfaction, but this is far better than many of our near neighbours, certainly better than the NHS, who I know have got difficulties with this locally, but it is a good indicator of where we are on this agenda, I think. Thank you.
Eileen?
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I really do welcome this report. I think, there's a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of work in engagement, which I think is one of the most important parts of it. With any equality and diversity strategy, you've got to make sure that engagement is really strong. I just think, this is not just about groups of people. This is just about everyone fits into one of these groups. Whether I could fit into over 50s, I'm a woman, I've got a disability, I wear hearing aids. There's so many different avenues that we need to explore with equality and diversity. I just think it's a really important piece of work, and it covers just about everything, so I really welcome it. So thank you for the work of Kelly and of officers.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions for group leaders? Bill? Andrew? No? I just want to make a very brief comment and to commend the work that's been done. I had a conversation with somebody about council services in particular, and some of our terminology, and often councils across the country talk about hard to reach communities, and someone challenged that terminology and talked about the hardly reached. And for me, that's really, it's a subtle but an important difference. And I think if you look at Betty the bus on the vaccination van, and there's other examples too, when we take our services to people where it's convenient for people, it's accessible for people, it's safe, it's secure, it's comfortable, then people will reach out, but we have to make a very positive and very deliberate effort to do that, and I think this policy really goes to the heart of that. So thank you, Kelly, thank you to Louise and Fliss and the wider team who have been involved in this. It's a positive report, so thank you. It's been moved, it's been seconded. All those in favour? That's everybody, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on now to item 7, which is the electric vehicle strategy, pages 143 to 176 in your packs. Councillor Richard Overton.
Thank you, Leader. Can I just first state this is a joint report with Councillor Healy through climate change. I'm really pleased to bring this important report and strategy to Cabinet today. We will all be aware of the increased focus on electric vehicle charging both nationally and locally. The move to electric vehicles supports our climate change action plan and commitment to become carbon neutral by 2030. This report provides an update on electric vehicle charging infrastructure, specifically in relation to future plans for charging points and the strategy going forward. I would highlight that since 2018, the number of publicly available EV charge points in the area has doubled, providing a total of 46 charging points for public use. 599 residents have installed a home charge point. 51 sockets have been installed by businesses, and since 2017 the number of ultra-low emission vehicles registered in the borough has increased by over 800%. Building on this data, our strategy sets out the priorities for the installation of EV charge points, and through demand analysis has been completed in order to give us a clear understanding of the scale and pace of EV rollout. It is however clear that in bringing forward EV infrastructure, it is not just down to the council, but the continued support is needed for the commercial market, residents, workplaces, retail and leisure destinations. This strategy and the next steps implementing it will support third parties in adopting EV charging. A key example of this is where national building regulations are changing to require all new build houses to have electrical vehicle charging points installed as standard. The strategy recognises that in some cases the council is best placed to lead on electrical vehicle charge points installation, such as in our council-owned car parks and on street locations. The next steps will be to explore funding opportunities to install charge points such as Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, procure a commercial partner to install and maintain charging points, engage with residents and businesses to support EV transition. Our teams continue to work on reducing the impact of our own vehicle operations. To date, the council has 6 electric vans on our fleet, with a further 8 arriving shortly. The council continues to work with partnering contractors to implement low emission vehicles in delivery of our frontline services, with a number of electric vehicles deployed. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the officers for producing this report and strategy, which is in a rapidly changing marketplace. I know Cabinet will agree this is fantastic work and demonstrates our commitment to supporting our residents and businesses in the rollout of electrical vehicles in the borough. I move the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. As Councillor Overton said, this is a big part of our move to being a net zero borough, and giving people that choice, and obviously having more electric vehicle charging infrastructure gives people the option to switch more easily to an electric vehicle. I think what the report sets out quite clearly is that it isn't just for the council to deliver this. We're setting a tone and we're setting an example, but we obviously want to support and work with workplaces and commercial partners in order to deliver this strategy and ensure that there's a good network of charging points. And as a starting point through our climate change grant scheme, we've actually contributed to the costs of electric vehicle charging points at places like schools and community centres. So we're already supporting that, and this strategy allows us to do that more. And again, as Richard has outlined, I think the important thing is, as an organisation, we lead by example, and that's what we are doing by converting our fleet to electric vehicles, but also encouraging and supporting our contractors to do the same. And I sort of dropped my children off at school this morning, parked at Dale Lane car park, and saw the park keeper's van plugged into the EV charging point, which is really encouraging to see. Also, obviously working with a Reaver, because public transport is a big part of this. It's not just about switching all the existing little vehicles to electric, it's also about encouraging more use of public transport, and so this connects well into our strategies around public transport, but also working with Arriva to ensure we've got hybrid or electric buses as well wherever we can. And of course, in terms of housing development, we are again leading by example by ensuring that on more recent new place developments we've built those with electric vehicle charging points ahead of that mandatory change coming in through planning policy, setting out that example and showing how it's done, and obviously within the strategy starting to set out that guidance for developers for new developments coming forward. So I really welcome this, and I look forward to that monitoring and seeing the impacts of the strategy as we move forward and move towards net zero.
Thank you. And clearly, climate change is a huge agenda, but I just want to remind cabinet members before I invite you in, it's about the electric vehicle strategy rather than a bigger debate about. We could be here all day talking about course, so important. But on the electric vehicle strategy, any comments or questions from members of the cabinet? Lee?
No, it's a very good report. It sets down now exactly what our intentions are in terms of this, and as you alluded to, getting to a wider debate, it clearly does filter into lots of other areas of the council, doesn't it? So myself and Councillor Overton, for instance, recently have been talking about New Place and Telford Wrekin homes and some of the new developments that we've got planned forward, going forward, particularly around Station Quarter, where EV charging in particular is going to be right at the heart of this, and we've really got to be pushing the envelope in terms of how we look at that, how we make things fit for the future, so that we can encourage that nudge towards more people using EV charging in particular. So it's a good report, but clearly a lot to do. And ultimately, and I think Councillor Thomason touched on this before, we can't solve this ourselves. We need a lot more support from government. And bearing in mind that all 8 of the current Conservative candidates have said they want to shrink the size of the state and cut departmental spending by 20%. I think that has huge implications for lots of different policy areas, but including this one.
Thank you. There's no other comments or questions from members of the cabinet. So, group leaders?
Yeah, I'll welcome the comments that Councillor Healy made, because it was the points that I wanted to raise really with regard to contractors and buses. And we do have a few levers in that we've paid the contractors and we subsidise some of the buses. So, but it'd be good if they're independently looking at it themselves. And I'm really heartened by the fact that New Place, we should show the flag and what we can do best by leading by example. So I welcome those. Thank you.
Yes, I can see that the uptake in electric vehicles is starting to increase rapidly, and that being the case, we're in danger of finding ourselves behind the curve on this. I note the 100,000 in there, which probably may not be enough money to buy any more than 10 charging points, depending on what the infrastructure is. Now, we've got 33 car parks in the borough. We could certainly make a start there, but I think we need to relook at the capital programme to get this underway. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem really in failing to get access to charging points for the huge take-up which is going to come, and it's coming rapidly if you look at the graph. So I think there's quite a bit of work to be done on that really. Now this is okay as a strategy, but I've been approached by people, organisations who want charging points put in their facilities within the community itself. Now at the moment, as I understand it, that facility still isn't there for local people to approach to get something done. So I certainly would start to look at the funding on this and try and get it underway.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll ask Caroline and Richard to come back on those particular points in a moment or two. I just want to add a couple of things. I think that the national context is absolutely critical to this. Not just about the 8 Conservative contenders to be the next Prime Minister talking about a smaller state, but many of them actively talking about departing from net zero ambitions in order to sort of appeal to some party base around this, and I think that would be a backward step. And whoever is the next Prime Minister of this country really needs to turbocharge our global, national and local response to climate change. And I'm particularly impressed by Chris Skidmore, a Conservative MP, who is making a lot of noise on this and trying to hold the line around net zero, because it would be a disaster if nationally we lose that leadership. I think I'll leave Karen and Rich to talk about some of the local things that we are doing, but the reality is it's like anything of this scale. the council can do what it can do in the envelope that it has, but without further funding from the government, without further abilities to raise funding from elsewhere, then we are always making those tough decisions, and the money that is contained within the budget, which was opposed by the Conservative group, contains millions of pounds of additional investment to tackle climate change, and each and every pound of that was voted against by the Conservatives. Caroline and Richard, do you want to come back on any of the points raised?
Well, I'd say Caroline mentioned the community fund, the green community fund, where community groups can bid in to get funding to deliver EV charging points. I know that the Park Lane Centre was successful and is having some installed, or having them installed. So, you know, there is that opportunity. We can do what we can do, and we will always, as in the report, we did say we look at our car parks and how we can deliver that. But, you know, it is worrying, as Councillor Carr said, about cutting the cloth by the candidates, because that will probably come down to local government again, and we've had so many cuts over the last year. But as the leader says, it's always ironic that the leader of the Conservatives always talks about how much we're spending on something, when actually he votes against any budget we put forward with spending commitments in there for a wide range of things, like New Place, where we're installing EV charging points, like the community fund, where we're giving grants to community groups to move to their climate change agenda on, and also, you know, where we're installing EV charging points. So I'm not going to take any lessons from Councillor Reid on funding.
Caroline?
Question of choices and priorities.
There's, if you have, as Richard said, if you've got community groups that are interested in EV charging points in public places or in schools, then by all means do come and talk to me about that. Our climate change grant scheme is open for applications now. So you know, that's there to look at. But I think the other thing to remember is also there are actually national grants available as well. So this is also about supplementing and working with the national grants that you can get towards installing EV charging points for commercial and for residential. And I think I'm an electric vehicle car owner. One of the things that most people actually is easier for people to do is not so much about the charging points in public car parks. That is important, and that's why it's in the strategy. It's also, if you've got the ability, if you've got off-street parking, or you know, we've got group parking in estates, is to be able to park, to be able to charge up on that slow charge overnight. And that's why part of the strategy is also about how we give people that guidance in terms of installing EV charging points at home, and as the strategy shows, we're seeing quite an increase in that as people have actually done that, and you can get grant support towards that. So, you know, there is funding in the strategy. There's also wider funding in the climate change capital budget. Again, was part of the budget you voted against. So you know, we do what we can with the resources we've got. We're absolutely committed to this agenda, so please don't be any doubt about that.
Thank you very much. It's a really good discussion. It's been proposed, it's been moved. All those in favour? That's everybody, thank you. We'll now move on to item 8 then, which is our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan.
Thank you, Lee. This is again a joint report with Caroline. I have the pleasure of bringing forward a second report, but this time focused on active modes of travel and planning for the future. Cabinet will be aware of the change in travel patterns through the pandemic, in part due to the change in working practices leading to a change in how we commute, but also changes in attitudes and uptake in more active modes of travel. Telford Wrekin Council continues to invest in our infrastructure, which has included over £600,000 in walking and cycling, that has delivered a new 2-kilometre cycleway and footway along the A518 between Donington and Liddershall, maintenance along the 22-kilometre Silking Way route, and a dedicated footway and cycleway sweeper. This year, the Council has invested a further £800,000 in the Silking Way, as well as £150,000 in high-quality cycle parking hubs that have recently been installed in Oaken Gates, Wellington, Ironbridge and Telford Town Centre. With the evolution of national policy on this agenda, this will continue to be one of the focus for this Council. This is now a clear expectation that to secure future active travel funding from government, the Council must have robust plans in place, such as those contained within this cycling and walking plan. This plan ensures that we are best placed to secure future national funding. It will ensure that we continue to support our residents to enable them to make more sustainable travel choices, in turn benefiting them from a health and wellbeing perspective, but also contributing to our climate change action plan. The cycle and walking plan focuses on targeted infrastructure improvements to the existing network and creating new connections. However, it is important to recognise that the plan is a working document that will be reviewed and updated regularly. Future planned work includes improved route mapping and promotion, continued expansion of the bike hub in Telford Town Park, and potential cycle hire schemes. Telford and Wrekin Council has appointed a dedicated active travel delivery specialist to progress our work and commitment to improving cycling and walking infrastructure across the borough. I therefore move the recommendations in the report.
Thank you. Caroline?
Yes, so yeah, again, this is obviously part of our journey to net zero as well as cutting across a whole host of agendas, as Richard said. Obviously has an impact on people's health and well-being. And I think, you know, the report does recognise that we have got a good walking and cycling network, but obviously that we've also got a new town footprint that was very much built around the car. So there are some challenges around that. But we carried out a public consultation, so this is very much built on public consultation in terms of what people want to make that their sort of walking and cycling more easier. And of course that involves some network changes and network connections, but it is more than that. It's also about confidence. And so I really welcome the fact that we are including things like bikeability courses, you know, getting people used to riding a bike, having led bike rides around the town park that again just give people that confidence to get, you know, back in the saddle if you're an adult and you haven't ridden a bike since you were a child, to do it as a leisure event with someone leading you in a nice safe setting, but just getting you used to cycling again. And as well as things like the signage changes, so having signage that actually gives you an indication of how long it takes to get from A to B, rather than saying it's X number of miles, which actually not everybody can understand exactly how long it's going to take them. So giving that better information on our key routes, and also safety, looking at things like sight lines, where it's appropriate to have lighting, and also where we're looking at cycling, separation of cycle routes from traffic wherever we can. So, you know, I think all of this really is a good way of encouraging people to leave the car, electric or not, at home a bit more, and to walk and cycle, not just for pleasure, but also just for getting to shops, for getting to work and so on. So, you know, I really welcome that. It's a huge amount of work gone into this, by the way, and I really welcome the work the officers have done on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen?
Thank you. Yeah, I really welcome this. I think it's you know, it covers lots of different areas. When I talk to employers locally, one of their biggest issues is for recruitment is to get people from one end of Telford to the other end of Telford. So if we can improve those networks and enable people to get into not only sort of employment opportunities, but also for the skills side of things as well, I think it's really important. I mean, if you look at some of the improvements that have been made, I've gone regularly past the new cycleway on the A518 from Donington to Muxton, and I think, you know, it's really opened things up along there. So I think it's investments like that we're making that are really going to improve that transport across the borough, and link in obviously with the health and wellbeing agenda to make people more active and do things on a daily basis in a more healthy and active way. So I really welcome it, and thanks for the report.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah, I fully welcome this. Get on our bikes and walk a bit more. I love walking. And in fact, with the pandemic, you could see an awful lot more people almost coming out for the first time out of the houses. Can't get my son off his computer, but that's another thing. But yeah, the only other thing I'd like to add to this, though, really, it's a minor criticism, and that's briefing of ward members and relevant officers from other departments. I've had two incidences, well, one really in both my ward and Karen's, where the Silking Way has been upgraded and certain alterations have been made to access to the Dothill Local Nature Reserve, which actually are detrimental. It's actually made it worse because it's encouraging people on motorbikes to come in because the gaps have widened. So a discussion before that work was undertaken with local officers who are aware of the circumstances in those particular areas, and they were even unaware that the work was going to take place. And for my wife and the friends of the Dothill Local Nature Reserve weren't very happy, let's just say. That's a small point, but it can be rectified if someone could talk through it. I looked at the comprehensive plans you got for the footpaths initiated in my ward, which looked fantastic, and then cross Karen's ward as well. But again, there'll be changes made which people need to be informed about, and sometimes it's through ward members that you can keep the community up to speed with what's going on. So if we could have an officer who's in charge of this or parts of it to brief us individually on our particular wards, and we can talk through what is going to change, and then we can advise folks either through Facebook or newsletters as what's going on, that would be very much welcomed. But very much otherwise, I really welcome this.
Andrew?
Walking and local cycling. Actually, I like this. In fact, I like it a lot. I have met with the officers that are providing the bikeability scheme and also learn to ride schemes as well. I think they're really good ideas. And the new cycleway from the clock tower out to the top of Kinsley Drive, I think that was a government grant well spent. I think it's very good and it's used. There's a couple of things I will mention here, is that tying in with our planners is absolutely essential to raise 106 monies for this, and that link needs to be absolutely tied in, certainly if we're using the Silking Way as a spine and coming off it, plus other areas. I think that's pretty good. The one question I do have around this is the focus group, or what focus groups were used and where the consultation took place. I didn't find it in the report there at all.
Before I ask the team or Dean to come on, I just say about the bikeability, I completely agree with you, Andrew. And actually, the biggest complaint I have about the bikeability is people who can't get onto the bikeability course because it's so oversubscribed. And my wife is one of those people who are complaining to me about the fact that we can't get our kids and our family onto the bikeability. So we're absolutely keen to increase that capacity because it is absolutely brilliant. And the fact that it links to our 10 by 10 about helping children learn to ride a bike, it's really, really positive. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that. Thank you. Richard and Geraldine, did you want to pick the question about the consultation, or was that one for
Dean?
Yeah.
Dean, have you got? Or Geraldine, sorry.
Well, we did. There was an online consultation, and it was promoted quite widely. So a big part of it there was online. I don't know if Dean, you want to add any more detail to that.
Thank you. It was online, and obviously there are cycle groups across the borough and walking interest groups as well. So as we begin to collate that database of knowledge of those groups, interest groups, we can absolutely engage with those groups and pick up any feedback and needs for improvements as we go forward.
Did we do parish councils, for instance, that sort of thing?
The consultation last year was promoted to far and wide, which included town parish councils.
They got notification of the online survey, and obviously as Dean said, then that more focused discussion with groups, the various rambler groups and various cycling groups that we have around the borough to get their specific take.
Yeah. You can always
and it did go very wide. We got lots of really rich data, and obviously we'll keep. This is a live document, as Richard said. Something we'll come back to.
Lovely. That's nice to have agreement on that. So it's been proposed, it's been seconded. Everyone in favour? So everybody. Thank you, Dean. We'll move now to item 9, which is the Financial Monitoring Report 22-23, pages 385 to 408. Councillor Ray Evans.
Thank you, Leader. This is the first Financial Monitoring Report for 22-23, and clearly it's still early in the year to make accurate projections. As things stand, the projected year-end outturn position is expected to be over budget by £551,000. However, this sum will be covered by the General Contingency Fund. There are a number of variations from the approved budget. As expected, many of these continue the trends seen last year, with the most significant pressures being experienced by children's safeguarding and family support. The capital programme schemes are in progress, and at the time of compiling the report, the projected spend was 87% of the budget allocation. Income collection in relation to council tax, sales ledger are slightly behind target set, whilst income for business rates is on target. I would remind the Cabinet that the current budget includes a general contingency of £3.95 million. This contingency is set aside to meet any unforeseen expenditure or income shortfall during the year. The current position indicates that £551,000 of the contingency will be required to meet the projected overspend at year end. This will leave almost £3.4 million available to meet any further pressures for the remainder of the year. There's also a contingency amount held centrally for contractual inflation, totalling almost £3.5 million. Inflation pressures currently identified total over £2 million. Thank you, Tim. The majority of which relate to neighbourhood and enforcement contracts and adult and social care inflation. An allowance to meet the 22-23 pay award is also held centrally. Obviously, this position will be updated in future reports as more information becomes available. Cabinet, you're asked to note and endorse the recommendations contained in section 1 of the report.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from members of the Cabinet? In which case, I have a seconder. Thank you. Bill, Andrew, anything from yourself on this report?
Yes, please. It's that time of the year again. We get our first almost major monitoring report for the year, and as normal, ever since I've almost been on the council, we're pretty much saying that children's services and adult services are providing us pressures, and this will be echoed up and down the country. I should imagine in every local authority. It's an unfortunate way we are at the moment that we've got so many vulnerable people to look after, and even though we try and budget as prudently as we can, every single year those cost pressures are there. If we hadn't saved over £100 million by cutting other and trimming back services, how on earth would we have funded these additional services, these additional monies for these services? And again, it just makes me angry. You know, we're talking of tax cuts, and these are the most vulnerable. Our very first opening statement, we have to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And where's this money going to come from? We're fortunate that we've managed to budget and build some surplus in there in terms of interest again, that we can afford this. What would happen if we couldn't? And how many local authorities up and down this country simply can't? How long have we got to shout for children's and adult services to be adequately funded? Otherwise, we'll have no option. We're going to have to put council tax up massively to cover this. And how are people locally going to afford this? They can't. They've already got a cost of living crisis. So come on, government. Stop thinking about tax cuts. We've got to fund this properly. Sorry.
No, thanks, Bill. I mean, I completely agree with you, and it's not a party issue. Actually, it's a local government versus central government issue. And I speak to Conservative council leaders up and down the country all of the time about this. And children's services, adult services, public health grant, money for roads, money for economic development, cost of living, the cost of implementing the government's, which is I absolutely agree with. The national living wage, the cost of introducing that to local government alone is £400 million additional, without a single penny more coming from the government on that, and that will lead to job cuts or service cuts. There's no getting around that. It has to be legal. So by that only that one decision alone is a £400 million headache for councils up and down the country. You've mentioned children's services. Adult services nationally underfunded by billions of pounds, and this is 12 years following a Conservative government. We're on to our fourth Conservative Prime Minister in a few months' time. We've got to get a grip of these fundamental issues that are facing the country. Otherwise, as we've seen it elsewhere in the country, there will be failure. Right. So it's proposed. Proposed and seconded. All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. Right, we've come to our final report now, which is the representation on outside bodies. Councillor Ray Evans.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not going to make a meal of this. We've recently reviewed the outside bodies and how many nominations those particular organisations won, the suitability of those organisations, and I'm asking for delegated authority for myself in consultation with the monitoring officer to consider those nominations and bring them forward back to you.
Thank you. That's seconded. Any comments or questions? No? All those in favour? That's everybody. Thank you very much. That brings the meeting to an end. Thank you very much for the conduct of all members during this morning's meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all at 6 o'clock.